Hello and welcome to the Gilshrek channel. My name is JB. As promised in some of my earlier videos, I want to start going over some of the different model trains I've started collecting here in Japan. So for my first video, I want to start out with this. This is a Tomix train set, and it's of the JR Series 183-189 passenger train. Alright, let's go ahead and open it up and take a look at what's inside. So first you got to remove this cardboard slip. So just put that to the side here. And inside you see you have this plastic box. This is very common for trains here in Japan for both Kato and Tomix, and I believe for several other brands. But most of the trains are going to come in like this plastic, kind of looks like a book, with this plastic little case here. And that's because a lot of the trains that you'll buy here, especially the more modern ones, are actually sets, because in Japan, trains are actually usually operated as EMUs, or electric multiple unit. And I'll go over that in more detail later in the video. But here, you see, open it up, and we got instructions here. And here is the train itself. So you can see it comes with 6 cars, and then there's some other accessory parts that you can add and put on yourself. So how does an EMU work? Well, to explain, let's take a look at this 5-car train consist here. So first, in a standard train, you have a locomotive at the front, and the locomotive will have a control cab where the engineer sits and operates the train. And it has powered trucks, so the traction effort from the locomotive pulls the train. This is how a standard train works. And if the train is electric, then it'll have a pantograph that picks up power at the locomotive. In an EMU, things are a little bit different. First of all, the power is actually spread throughout the train, so there are powered trucks that are spread to each car. Now, they might not be every single truck, but they are spread throughout the train. Also, it's very often the case that you'll have a control cab at both the front and back end of the train. This makes it really easy for when a train enters a station that's at the end of the line, the locomotive engineer and conductor can just switch cars and go to the opposite ends of the train, and then the train can pull out of the station going in the opposite direction. Also, if the train's electric, it'll have pantographs spread throughout the cars to pick up electricity, so the power distribution is a little more even. There's also something called a DMU, or diesel multiple unit train. Just like an EMU, the powered trucks are spread throughout the train, and there's a control cab at both the front and back end of the train. However, instead of picking up electricity from a third rail or an overhead wire, there are diesel generators that produce electricity spread throughout the train. These type of trains are also common in Japan. However, EMUs are much more common because of their greater efficiency over diesel-powered trains. EMUs are very common in Japan because they meet the unique requirements of Japanese railroads with its many passenger trains that make frequent starts and stops. Because of the way EMUs work, they have a greater power-to-weight ratio than standard locomotives. What I mean by this is, in a regular train, all the power is located in the locomotive. So essentially you have an entire car that's being used just to power the train, and there's no payload in that car, so it's considered kind of wasteful. However, with the EMU, the mechanisms that power the train are spread into cars that are also carrying passengers or payload. So there isn't an extra car that's just adding weight to the train just to power the train. Instead, that's integrated into the rest of the train. And this allows the train to have greater acceleration, which is really good for the frequent starts and stops. EMUs are also common in America and in Europe, mainly in subways and inner-city commuter trains, for similar reasons to those of Japan. Also, this greater efficiency was applied to the Shinkansen, and it was this innovation that allowed the bullet train to become the world-famous high-speed train that it is today. So the question is, how does this translate into model trains? So let's first take a look at a typical American model train consist. So once again, I have my 5 cars, or 4 cars in a locomotive, and you'll see that the locomotive, of course, has a motor. So there'll be a motor here that provides the power to the wheels, and in many cases, there's also a light board that controls the lights. So the locomotive will light up, in many cases, especially if it's DCC, it'll be directional. So when the locomotive is going forward, the headlights will light up, and when it's going in reverse, the reverse lights or the tail lights will light up. And the wheels on that locomotive provide the power or the traction to pull the train, and they also pick up electricity from the track to run the motor. How then do Japanese model train manufacturers model EMUs? You might think that perhaps that they, just like the prototype, put motors in several cars connected to the same consist, but this isn't necessary and in fact would make the trains a lot more expensive to produce. Instead, they do something like this. Usually you'll have a powered unit located somewhere in the middle of the train. The powered unit will have the motor, and this motor will power the wheels, and these wheels will also pick up electricity to operate the motor. Additionally, at the end of the train, you'll have cars that have directional light boards in them that can operate the lights. So when the train's going in one direction, one car will have the headlights lit up and the other will have red taillights lit up. And then when the train goes in the opposite direction, they'll just simply switch lights. And of course, these end cars will also have power pickups to operate the light boards. Now, some have argued that this is one of the reasons why DCC is not very popular in Japan, because in order to add DCC to a train like this, you'd have to have a decoder in the motor or the powered unit, as well as two decoders on the end cars to control the lights. Of course, that's a subject for another video. As I explained, you can see here that this is the power car. You can see the underframe, there's a little box there, and that's where the motor is. And then if you look carefully on the inside, you can see that the detail is just that one little strip there. It doesn't go down. So the motor is all in this area here. And then I have my end cars that have the directional lighting. So the lights here in the front will light up. And here you can see that there's a little more detail that actually goes all the way down to the floor on the interior of the car. And then the rest of these cars either just get pushed or pulled along. And the instruction manual points out that if you want to, you can actually add a lighting strip into the passenger cars so that the insides will light up. But they don't come that way. That's something you have to add on. And yeah, even here in the instructions, you can see where it says M kind of there in the middle. It's just showing you that, yeah, there's one car that has the motor in it. Some background on the prototype of this train. The JR Series 183 is an EMU that was developed in the late 60s, early 70s, and was first used in 1972 on the JNR, or Japan National Railway. It was continued for use until 1987 by the JNR, when the JNR was split up, and then it was continued use by its predecessors, JR East and JR West. On JR East, it's still currently being used, although for seasonal trains, and on JR West, they stopped using this train in the early 2010s. This train operates on the standard narrow gauge track of the Japanese railroads of 3 feet 6 inches, and it has a maximum speed of around 75 miles an hour or 120 kilometers an hour. This Tomix model of this train is a fairly well built and well detailed model. It's part of their high grade series, which I'm still kind of learning about Tomix and what they sell here in Japan, but that seems to be one of their higher end lines that they sell. Online, I found it retailing for around 17 to 18,000 yen for the 6-car set. And it pretty much just operates on DC, but it does have the directional lights. So the forward cab, when it's going in the forward direction, will have headlights lit up, as well as the train name light coming on, or the branding light. I'm not exactly sure what they call that, but it's basically like a logo for that particular train, and that lights up. And then the reversing car has the same lights, except for it has 2 red trailing lights. So depending on what direction the train is going, there's a sensor in the end locomotive or the end cars, and the directional lights will turn on accordingly. The motor, as I previously said, is in the center. It's in one of the passenger cars, and they do a decent job of hiding where it's located. This seems to be a fairly standard design, even compared to trains made by Kato, where they try to hide the motor mechanism in one of the passenger cars. The detailing is very nice. The paint job seems to be well. There's a lot of parts that seem to be properly applied. Once again, I'm still learning about the prototype, so there probably are some nuts and bolts and rivet counting out there that will probably point out that there's some errors in the model. There were some extra parts that came with it. The little like arrow nose plate, I guess that's what I'll call it, on the front of the locomotive had to be installed. However, when looking at pictures of the prototype, not all of the trains had this, so that might be partially why you have to install it yourself. In fact, as I've been putting these trains together and collecting Japanese trains, I'm noticing that they often will give you some specialty parts that you add on yourself, which, depending on which particular line the train was being used on, would be prototypical or not. I also, especially with the number plates, which this particular train did not have any, but some of the steam engines I've purchased have number plates, and they'll actually give you like 3 or 4 different road numbers, and then you can pick the plate, so that's kind of nice. But I'm digressing. But otherwise, yeah, the train runs very smoothly. It seems to go fairly well through the turnouts, which some of my locomotives seem to get stuck. This one runs pretty smoothly through them. And I've owned it now for about 3-4 weeks, and it has definitely gotten some use, and it still seems to be holding up pretty well. The operating mechanism is running pretty smoothly. So if you were looking into purchasing this particular model, I would definitely recommend it. And so far, based on the experience of this train, I would definitely recommend Tomix if you're planning on operating your trains as DC. I have heard, for those of you who would hope to operate these on a DCC system, the Takato's trains are much easier to convert because of the fact that Digitrax and other DCC companies actually make swap-out boards that will fit into their locomotives. Whereas with Tomix, I've heard that because they have this continual brightness lighting, so basically the lights turn on and they stay the same brightness regardless of how much DC power the train is getting, that circuitry apparently does cause some problems, and I guess some people have even reported decoders getting burned out because of that circuitry. But if you're planning on just operating this train as a standard DC train like I am, I would definitely recommend it. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video interesting and informative. And if you did, if you could please just click that subscribe button, it would be greatly appreciated. Recently, YouTube has changed some of their policies, and if, say, I would like to add a button onto my title card here so you can go directly to my Facebook page or website, I need to have at least 1,000 subscribers. So if you like this video, and if you're willing to subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated.